Greetings everyone, it is Zakhele here and we are back this week with our weekly videos. So this week I would like to talk about something that has been in the news, which is the South African National Defence Force, right? So pretty much I'll be giving you the libertarian positions, because there's more than one. There are two really opposing ones on defense, on armies, on, the state having access to these institutions that have a monopoly on the use of violence, institutions that can use violence and it be considered just, good, or reasonable and justifiable, depending on whatever, descriptor you want to use for it. So we are talking about defense today, and as I've mentioned, libertarians, we have two positions when it comes to defense, right? There's a pro-capacitating and allowing the state to have this ability to defend not only itself, but, to be able to defend the rights of its citizens. And then you have a position that really takes the logic of saying the state is bad to its ultimate conclusion. And this is a position held by a lot of anarchists, right? And this is a position that says the state is bad, therefore it would make sense that an institution like the police force or the army would be bad, because that is what the state uses to exercise its power and force, right? And if you say that the state is bad, then you would say that this institution is bad too. Now, to give a brief description, right, beyond that one, is that in the first position, right, you have, a minarchist position, as I would like to call it, for those who don't know. A minarchist is someone who believes that the state should exist but have limited scope and power. In libertarian circles, this usually means a state that exists that is not involved or heavily regulating the economy, right? A state that is limited to just pretty much protecting private property and having a justice system that will allow for the settlement of disputes. I know the most extreme of minarchists would have that. Others would prefer a state that builds roads and builds the collective goods of society and just leaves the regulation of the broader economy to the market itself. So it differs amongst minarchists, but that's what a minarchist is, someone who believes that the state should exist, right? And of course that is contrasted with an anarchist who is opposed to the very existence of a state. So a minarchist would be in favor of armies being capacitated because they would be like, hey, this is an institution that protects the private property rights of citizens. Therefore, you as a libertarian, or anyone really, because I believe everyone is a fan of private property rights, if you want or are serious about the protection of private property rights, then you would capacitate, the police force or the army, because these are the institutions that ensure that when someone is trying to commit an injury or has committed an injury against your person or your property, you have some form of recourse. You have an ability to be able to bring that person to task, and they also act as a deterrent against, a chancer who would want to commit said injury to person or to property. So a minarchist would say, right, the police force and the army enable the better protection of private property rights domestically for citizens, not only domestically too, right? Because if you say that citizens are supposed to have their private property rights protected, then it means that the institution which they pay taxes to, which has a duty to protect those rights, should not be limited. Why should it be limited to its territorial jurisdiction when, for instance, a citizen is not limited in terms of their investment capacity? I, as a South African, if I decide to invest in a particular country, own a mine there, own a supermarket chain, right, and the government of that country wants to expropriate that supermarket chain of mine, the minarchist position says that the South African government has a duty to go to that particular jurisdiction and call that particular government to order, pretty much stop them from confiscating my supermarkets, my mine, or whatever, because those are my property rights. That is my capital that I would have invested therein, and as such, since the government has a duty to protect that is why the government will be deployed there. So this is the thinking, by the way, behind the deployments of foreign governments all across the world, right? And as I'm sure you can tell, even though you're quite opposed to war, as I'm sure some people would be like, this war hawk, right? But I'm sure sure you can tell the reasonability of this position because, well, it stems from a protection of private property rights. So that is the minarchist position. It protects private property rights not only, domestically, but also internationally, because the logic does apply internationally. And to me, it seems, sound enough if you are in that particular camp, right? And then the other camp is the anarchist position. The anarchist position is pretty much a position which is opposed to the state. So it would make sense that it would be opposed to, the standing armies of a state or the police force of a particular state. And this position is pretty much, one would say, a pacifist position, right? A position that is quite opposed to warfare as a concept to begin with. But in the case of, a country or a jurisdiction, right, and things like policy, it is a position that is opposed to a policy that would, for instance, increase the funding of the army or the police force. And if you were to look at South Africa, actually, over the past, I think, couple of years, if you were an anarchist in the anarchist position, you'll be quite happy, right, because the police force has been consistently being defunded, not to mention the South African National Defence Force. So I think they are the only government department in the Defence Ministry which has had a consistent budget cut. And here we have been calling for budget cuts in every other department, right? But because we understand the importance of, having a national defense, I don't think we have been quite as explicit as for calling for cuts to the defense budget, which really would be even unfair on the defense ministry, because every time you look at the defense budget, it is always decreasing year on year. So that is the anarchist position. The anarchist position is you don't want to capacitate these people. These are the people who actualize the power and violence of the state. Therefore, you want to have them as weak as is possible so that the state does not grow as powerful as it's supposed to be, and thus people become much more free, right? And this is pretty much the two positions within the libertarian sphere. Pro-war or anti-war is a very general descriptor that does not give it enough justice, that does not do it enough justice, these positions, because, under certain circumstances, a minarchist is anti-war if it's not a war that has tangible benefits or the protection of private property rights of South Africans or of whatever really, jurisdiction you may be part of. And an anarchist too may be a proponent of actual fighting if they consider it to be in a defensive manner, and as such, part of the anarchist position is that someone is entitled to defend themselves, and if those people decide to voluntarily, meet up and create a group of defense, then that will be perfectly viable too. So, anti-war and pro-war isn't the best way to describe it, but these are the two positions. And tying them back to South Africa, tell us what you think. Are you in favor of the government increasing the defense funding, or are you against war in general for whatever reason, right? I wanted to give the libertarian perspective, if so, on this issue of defense and, the different camps that exist within this form of thinking. But I am more interested in hearing your thoughts in the comment section. So please give the video a like. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you think about the South African Defense Force, as I said, and, really give us a like, subscribe, and do all those nice things. But most importantly, never forget to stay free.